What if the house you move into holds a secret? A room that was never meant to be opened. A room that's been sealed away for years. For James Park, the discovery of an old hidden door in his new home would set off a chain of events he could never have imagined. And some doors, once opened, should never be closed. James Park had always wanted a house of his own. After years of renting, he finally found the perfect place. A spacious Victorian home nestled in a quiet neighborhood.
It was old, yes, but there was something about it that called to me. The creaky floors, the high windows, the Gothic charm. It felt like it had stories to tell.
And for James, who had spent his life working in the fast-paced world of law, a bit of mystery was exactly what he was looking for. The first few weeks in the house were nothing out of the ordinary. James spent most of his time renovating and settling in. But one evening, as he was sorting through the attic, he discovered something strange. Behind a row of dusty boxes, there was a small, rusted door in the wall. It was hidden behind old furniture, as if someone had deliberately tried to conceal it.
Curious, I pulled at the door, and to my surprise, it creaked open with ease. Inside, there was nothing but a small room, shrouded in darkness.
The air was cold, so cold that it took James a moment to realize he was shivering. The room was completely empty, save for an old chair in the middle of the floor. But what caught his eye was the wall, scratched, scarred, and faintly covered in something dark. James felt an odd chill crawl up his spine. His instincts told him to close the door, to forget about the room and never think of it again. But something about it tugged at him, a strange sense of unfinished business.
I couldn't resist. I stepped inside.
The air inside the room seemed to thicken the moment he crossed the threshold. The temperature dropped, and the faint smell of decay filled his nostrils. The walls were lined with cracks, and in the dim light, James could just make out what appeared to be words, scratched into the wood, as if someone had etched them there in desperation.
They were almost illegible, but I could make out a few phrases. They never left. Don't listen to them. It's in the walls.
Suddenly, James heard something, a soft tapping noise coming from the far corner of the room. His heart raced as he looked around, his eyes darting back and forth. The tapping continued, faster now, like the frantic rhythm of nails scraping against wood. He turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind him, as if the house itself had decided it wasn't ready to let him go. Panic surged in his chest as he tried to pry the door open, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the very walls were holding him captive. And then from the corner of the room, a low, raspy voice whispered,
"You shouldn't have opened it."
James spun around, his breath catching in his throat. Standing in the far corner of the room, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure. A man, or at least it appeared to be a man, dressed in tattered clothes, his face obscured by a veil of darkness.
Who are you?
James demanded, his voice shaky. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it stepped closer, its movement slow and deliberate, like it was floating just above the floor. The tapping grew louder, and James realized it wasn't the sound of nails against wood. It was footsteps. Soft, echoing footsteps that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The figure raised its hand, and James froze. His eyes widened in horror as he saw what the figure was holding. A small, blood-stained knife. The whispers in the walls grew louder, almost deafening.
"It's here, it never left."
James struggled to breathe, his pulse pounding in his ears. He backed away, his heart thundering in his chest. The room seemed to close in on him, the walls pressing in, suffocating him. The whispers, the footsteps, the figure, it was all becoming too much. Then, just as quickly as it had started, everything stopped. The footsteps faded, the whispers quieted. The figure stood perfectly still, watching him with empty, hollow eyes. James didn't know how long he stood there, frozen in fear. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. His mind screamed for him to escape, but his body refused to obey. Finally, with a burst of adrenaline, James shoved the door open, gasping for air as he stumbled into the hallway. The door slammed shut behind him, but the eerie presence still lingered in the room. He didn't dare look back. That night, James tried to sleep, but the house refused to let him rest. The whispers returned, faint at first, but growing louder with each passing minute. They seemed to come from the very walls of the house, taunting him, whispering his name. And then, in the dead of night, there was a knock at his door. James's heart stopped. He tried to ignore it, but the knocking persisted, growing louder, more frantic. It was as though something, or someone, was trying to get in. He couldn't take it any longer. He rushed to the door and yanked it open. Nothing, just the empty hallway. But that's when he noticed it. The door to the hidden room was wide open. James knew then that the house had claimed him, just like it had claimed so many before. It had been waiting for him to open the door, to step inside, and now that he had, there was no way out. The next morning, neighbors reported hearing strange sounds coming from James's house. Whispers that echoed through the streets, growing louder as the sun dipped below the horizon.
The house stood in silence, but those who passed by could swear they saw a figure standing in the window, watching them with empty eyes.
James was never seen again.